The air in Selene's cradle smelled of recycled hope and yesterday's sweat. Coden leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking under the weight of his disdain for authority and questionable dietary choices. I swear, if this place had any less atmosphere, we'd all be suffocating on our own sarcasm, he muttered, staring at the screens cluttered with numbers that made as much sense as a politician's apology. Zilka, the strategist with a mind sharper than a laser scalpel and a tongue to match, glanced over. You'd think with all the brainpower crammed into this tin can, someone would have figured out how to make it smell like roses instead of a locker room. Roses are overrated. Besides, roses don't keep you warm at night, Mav chimed in, her fingers dancing over the console like a pianist with a caffeine addiction. Mav, the engineer, was the kind of person who could fix a hyperdrive with a paperclip and a prayer, though she preferred duct tape and a healthy dose of swearing. The trio sat cramped in Control Room B of Selene's cradle, the singular lunar outpost that was equal parts engineering marvel and bureaucratic nightmare. Powered by miniature black holes, the city perched on the edge of logic and science fiction like a drunk uncle at a wedding. You see that? Coden pointed at a spike on the energy grid readouts, a line shooting upwards like optimism before tax season. Zilka leaned in, squinting at the data. Looks like our little black hole's having a temper tantrum. Who knew celestial phenomena could be so moody? Mav grinned, her eyes as bright as the chaotic dance of electrons she adored. Must be Monday, but Coden wasn't laughing. His gaze stayed glued to the screen, which flickered ominously as if it had a secret and wasn't sure whether to spill it or not. This is different, he said, voice dropping a notch. Not your usual glitch. You're telling me our cosmic power source has gone rogue, Zilka quipped, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. If by gone rogue you mean acting like my ex on a bad day, then yes, Coden replied. And look, it's not just a blip. There's a pattern. The room fell silent, the usual hum of machinery suddenly more ominous than comforting. They exchanged glances, the kind that spoke volumes of worry, curiosity, and a fair amount of impending doom. Could be external, Mav suggested, the words hanging between them like a bad smell. Someone's messing with the grid. Someone, Zilka repeated, letting the word roll around her mouth like a bitter pill. Or something. Coden rubbed his temples, the pressure building in his head like a bad plot twist. Well, it's not like this place doesn't have enough problems already. Let's add a potential sabotage to the list. Zilka snorted. Just another day in Selene's cradle, where the chances of survival are marginally better than winning the lottery. Mav, ever the optimist, cracked her knuckles. Guess we'd better find out who's pulling the strings before someone decides to cut them. Their investigation began with the elegance of a sledgehammer. Coden, with all the subtlety of a supernova, stormed into the main hub, his presence as welcome as a solar flare in a spacesuit. Hey, you, he barked at a techie buried in wires. Seen anything weird on the grid? The techie blinked up at him, clearly torn between fear and confusion. Define weird. We're on the moon, mate. Weird's our baseline. Weirder than usual. Ah, well no, but I'll keep an eye out for moon monsters or whatever. Zilka, trailing behind, rolled her eyes. Smooth, Coden, real smooth. Why not just yell sabotage and see who runs? Meanwhile, Mav was knee-deep in a tangle of cables, her hands moving with the precision of someone utterly at home in chaos. Found something, she called. There's a signal piggybacking on our grid. Coden and Zilka joined her, the three of them huddled around like conspirators at a particularly dull coup. So, it's not just a bad case of lunar indigestion, said Zilka. Someone's definitely poking around where they shouldn't. And using our little black hole as their personal plaything, Mav added, eyes narrowing as she traced the lines of code. Crafty bastards. Crafty or suicidal, Coden grumbled. You mess with the power source, you mess with everyone on this rock. The thought lurked between them, a shadow stretching long and dark over the reality they faced. Humanity's little lunar home wasn't just a novelty. It was a fragile lifeline, as tenuous as the smiles on the bureaucrats who funded it. Think it's the Martians again, Zilka mused, her tone light but her eyes sharp. Nah, Coden replied. Martians are too busy pretending they're not related to us. So what? We've got some rogue AI with a god complex. Mav suggested, half joking, half hoping she was wrong. Or maybe it's the universe's way of telling us to pack up and leave, Coden said, with a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. Because we're such great tenants. Zilka tapped her chin thoughtfully, her mind already spinning webs of strategy. Let's not jump to conclusions until we know more, but we should keep this quiet. Last thing we need is a panic. Coden smirked. Oh, come on. What's more fun than a good old-fashioned panic on a lifeless moon? Surviving it, Mav replied, her expression deadly serious. Let's keep digging. As the trio set to work, the hum of the city continued, oblivious to the threat lurking beneath its surface. Coden felt the weight of it pressing down on him, like a particularly persistent hangover. But in the heart of Selene's cradle, the line between survival and oblivion was thinner than the atmosphere outside. Hey, if we die, Coden remarked, at least we won't have to pay off those student loans. Mav chuckled, the sound a brief respite from the encroaching dread. You always find the silver lining, don't you? It's about the only thing I'm good at, Coden admitted, checking the grid again, eyes scanning for anomalies like a hawk with a caffeine addiction. Meanwhile, Zilka was formulating plans faster than a computer could compute. We need eyes on the outskirts of the city, she declared. If there's a signal coming in, there's gotta be a source. I'll rally a scout team, Mav offered, though they all knew that scout team was code for whoever's not busy pretending to work. As the clock ticked on, the trio found themselves on the cusp of something big. The kind of big that made them question their life choices and debate the merits of a quiet life on Earth, or Mars, or anywhere that didn't come with a side of existential crises. Just another day in paradise, Coden muttered as they prepared to delve deeper into the mystery. I swear if I survive this, I'm asking for a raise. If you survive this, you'll deserve more than just a raise, Zilka pointed out, her voice betraying a hint of admiration. But Coden just grinned, that familiar, reckless glint in his eye, or a medal, preferably one made of chocolate. The tension simmered, a promise of chaos wrapped in the silence of the lunar night. Somewhere, something was waiting, pulling strings they couldn't yet see. Coden, Zilka, and Mav stood on the precipice of discovery, ready to dive headfirst into a maelstrom of uncertainty. Because in Selene's cradle, one thing was certain: the only way out was through, and they were just the kind of fools to see it to the end. The air in Selene's cradle was getting more suspicious by the minute, and not just because of Coden's questionable dietary habits. The smell of recycled air was failing to mask the underlying aroma of a looming disaster. Coden, Zilka, and Mav were now knee-deep in the kind of intrigue that made conspiracy theorists look like optimists. All right, said Coden, his eyes glued to the screen like a kid watching a horror flick he wasn't supposed to see. I've seen more pleasant patterns in burnt toast than what this data is showing us. Zilka flicked her gaze from one console to another, her mind slicing through numbers with the precision of a butcher with a vendetta. So, we've got a rogue signal, and the council thinks it's just a Tuesday hiccup. Typical. Mav shook her head, smirking as she continued her symphony of typing. And here I thought lunar politics couldn't get any more enlightened. If ignorance is bliss, the council's got to be the happiest bunch on this rock. The anomaly on the grid wasn't just your garden variety glitch. It was a full-blown assault on communication, a cosmic prank pulled by a force that had more creativity than sense. The signal was traced, zigzagging through the system like a toddler on a sugar rush, and then there it was. The moon itself was talking back. Are you telling me the moon's developed a personality? Coden asked, skeptically squinting at the screen as if it had personally wronged him. I know, Mav replied, rolling her eyes. Talk about moonlighting hobbies. Zilka, ever the strategist, leaned in with the enthusiasm of someone about to unravel a particularly nasty knot. Enough joking. We've got a sentient force within the moon or something close enough to it, messing with our comms, and it's not stopping at the grid. Well, that sounds like the setup to a bad sci-fi novel, Coden snorted. Let's just hope it doesn't leave us with a cliffhanger and no sequel. No, this is our reality, Zilka said, her tone all business. And it's not just a communications problem. This thing is smart, whatever it is. It's disrupting everything. Coden ran a hand through his hair as if massaging his scalp might help untangle the mess they were in. So, the moon's alive and now it's throwing a tantrum. Perfect. Next thing you know, it'll start demanding half our snacks. Mav glanced up, her usual bright, caffeine-fueled eyes narrowing. We can't let this reach the council and have them dismiss it as another technical glitch. They'll just serve us a plate of all systems are normal and call it a day. Yeah, and then we'll all be fried like festival food when this moon decides it's had enough of us, Coden said. I say we go for a closer look. Agreed, Zilka said, nodding. She was already on to the next move, her mind a whirlwind of strategy. We'll need to get into the core systems. If this thing's hijacking the moon, we need to know how deep its fingers are in the pie. Well, I'm not about to let a lump of rock outsmart me, Mav said, smirking as she began to gather her tools. Let's crack this mystery wide open. The trio moved with the urgency of people who knew the difference between a minor inconvenience and a full-scale disaster. Coden, Zilka, and Mav headed towards the core systems, exchanging sarcasm like greetings. The corridors of Selene's cradle seemed to close in around them, the air getting thicker with the weight of their mission. You think we'll find an alien sitting in there with a cigar laughing his ass off? Coden asked as they walked. Please, if it's smoking, I'm going to charge it for damages, Mav replied, and maybe offer it some of Coden's questionable snacks. Hey, my snacks are gourmet compared to some of the stuff in the mess hall, Coden retorted. Besides, you never know when a pack of moon cheese might come in handy. As they approached the core systems, the hum of machinery grew louder, a relentless drone that reminded them just how precarious their situation was. This wasn't just a glitch or a minor malfunction. This was the moon, possibly alive, and throwing a cosmic-sized tantrum. All right, team, Zilka said, stepping up to the console. Let's see what we're dealing with. Mav was already at the terminal, fingers flying over the keys like she was typing out her memoirs. Okay, first impressions. This signal is sophisticated. It's not some random interference. It's communicating. Great, the moon's got a Twitter account, Coden muttered, peering over her shoulder. Hope it's not trending for the wrong reasons. Zilka was analyzing the data with the kind of intensity that could melt steel. It's not just communicating, it's learning, adapting to our systems. Coden let out a low whistle. What, like some kind of lunar Skynet? That's comforting. Only if you consider being outsmarted by a rock comforting, Mav said, not looking up from her work. The trio worked in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a heavy fog. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just a curiosity. It was a threat, one that was creeping closer with every second. Council won't believe this, Zilka finally said, breaking the silence. They'll wave it off as a software issue and go back to filing their nails. Why would they believe it? Mav replied, her tone bordering on bitter. We're on a moon. It's not like it's been up to anything interesting for the last few billion years. Why start now? Coden folded his arms, staring at the screen with an intensity that could strip paint. Well, if this thing does want to hijack the moon, it's going to have a hell of a time with us around. I've got half a mind to go full cowboy on its ass. Sounds like a plan I'd pay to see, Zilka said with a smirk. But let's try to understand it first before we start throwing punches. Right, Mav added, her voice dry. Wouldn't want to piss it off. It might start throwing moon rocks at us. The deeper they dug, the worse the picture became. The signal wasn't just piggybacking on their systems. It was embedding itself, learning, evolving. It was as if the moon had developed a mind of its own and it wasn't too happy about company. Okay, we need a containment strategy, Zilka said, her voice sharp. And fast. Mav nodded, already thinking 2 steps ahead. I can rig up a firewall, but it won't hold for long. We need a long-term solution. And what about Earth? Coden asked, looking at his companions. We can't just sit here and let this thing cut us off. Mav paused, a half-smile on her lips. At least if we get cut off, we won't have to listen to Earth politics for a while. Silver linings, Mav, Zilka said, shaking her head. But let's focus on keeping our lines open first. As they worked, a plan began to form, half-baked but promising. Coden, Zilka, and Mav were nothing if not resourceful, and if Selene's cradle was going to be hijacked, it would have to get through them first. All right, here's the deal, Zilka said, drawing them in. We need to isolate this signal, see if we can cut it off from the systems it's trying to control. And if that doesn't work, Coden asked, a hint of a challenge in his voice. Then we go to Plan B, Mav said, her grin a sharp contrast to the tension in the room. Whatever that is. Improvisation is the mother of invention, Coden said with a shrug. Or is it necessity? I forget. Either way, we're in this for the long haul, Zilka replied. Let's get to work. The trio set about their task with a determination that was almost palpable. It wasn't just about survival. It was about outsmarting a force that had no business being on their moon. The hum of the machinery was a constant reminder of the stakes, a backdrop to their efforts. As they labored, time seemed to stretch, bending under the weight of their mission. There was no room for failure. Failure meant the end of everything they'd worked for. But Coden, Zilka, and Mav were nothing if not stubborn. They weren't about to let a lunar anomaly get the best of them. Hey, at least this'll make a good story if we survive, Coden said, breaking the silence. Right, Mav replied, her voice light. We'll call it the day the moon got a mind of its own. And Coden's snacks saved the day, Zilka added with a grin. Yes, because moon cheese is clearly the answer to all of life's problems, Coden said, rolling his eyes. With each passing moment, the trio pushed closer to a solution. The signal was still out there lurking, but they were on its trail and they weren't about to give up. You know, Coden said, glancing at his companions, if we pull this off, first round's on me. Mav smirked, not missing a beat. I'll hold you to that, Coden, and I plan to drink enough to drown out the memory of this nightmare. Deal, Zilka said, her eyes never leaving the screen. Now, let's save the moon. And so they worked. 3 souls against the unknown, fighting not just for their lives but for the hope of a tomorrow where the stars weren't quite so menacing. Because if Selene's cradle had taught them anything, it was that humanity was nothing if not tenacious, even when the odds were stacked against them. As they toiled away, the weight of the universe pressing down, they knew one thing for sure. The moon may have had a mind of its own, but it hadn't met the likes of Coden, Zilka, and Mav. Not yet. And if the moon wanted a fight, then a fight it would get. The corridor leading to Control Room B was a claustrophobic tunnel festooned with wires and the occasional flickering light, like an old horror movie set in space. Coden, Zilka, and Mav hurried along its length, the oppressive atmosphere adding a sense of urgency to their mission. So, how long before Earth starts to notice their favorite moon is doing the cha-cha? Coden asked, his voice echoing slightly in the metal confines. About as long as it takes for them to realize we're not sending back our usual reports, Zilka replied, glancing at the data streaming across her console as she walked. And that's assuming the Council hasn't already written us off as a technical glitch. Let's hope they go with the wait-and-see approach, Mav added, her fingers twitching to get back to work. Because if they panic, we're going to have more than just a moody moon to worry about. They reached the cramped space of Control Room B, a place where recycled air mixed with the scent of ozone and desperation. Mav slid into her seat at the console with the ease of someone who'd spent way too much time doing exactly that, while Coden and Zilka hovered nearby, ready to jump in if needed. All right, let's see what our rebellious moon's been up to, Mav muttered, her fingers dancing across the keys as she pulled up the latest data. The screen flickered, and for a moment the trio held their breath. Well, isn't that just fantastic, Coden said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. It started playing with the orbit. Zilka leaned over, her eyes narrowing at the chaotic stream of numbers and graphs. If this keeps up, Earth will have front row seats to a lunar light show, and not the good kind. Think they'll charge admission? Mav asked, her tone darkly amused. I mean, everything's a money grab these days. Zilka shrugged. Depends. Might be cheaper than a trip to Mars. The signal was getting stronger, its tendrils worming their way through the systems like a particularly tenacious parasite. Each new access point, each system it touched, was another step closer to chaos. Okay, so our moon's basically throwing an orbital tantrum, Coden said, pacing the cramped room. How do we tell Earth without setting off alarm bells? Analog, Mav said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Analog, Zilka echoed, skepticism lacing her voice. What are we supposed to do, send a telegram? Close, Mav replied with a smirk. We dig out one of those ancient radio sets. They're not flashy, but this signal is too modern to think of jamming something so archaic. Coden chuckled, shaking his head. I knew hanging on to those old things would come in handy one day. What do you need? Mav flashed a grin. Find me a radio and I'll tell Earth we're not dead yet. As Coden and Zilka set off to locate the relic of communication technology, Mav focused on the console, her mind a whirl of strategies and half-formed plans. The moon might have been learning, adapting, but so were they. And humans had a knack for surviving the impossible. The corridors of Selene's cradle echoed with their footsteps, their mission both simple and absurd. Save the world with a piece of technology older than any of them. It was almost poetic in its irony. You think this thing has any idea what it's doing? Coden asked as they rifled through a storage room that hadn't been touched in years. Zilka shrugged. Who knows? It's like asking if a toddler understands why they're throwing a tantrum. All I know is it's causing one hell of a mess. Behind a stack of dusty crates they found it, a bulky, dusty radio set. Coden lifted it with a grunt, the weight a reminder of just how far technology had come, and how far they'd fallen if they were back to using this. Think it'll still work? Zilka asked. If it doesn't, we're screwed anyway, Coden replied, lugging the relic back toward Control Room B. Back in the cramped space, Mav had already begun clearing a spot for the radio, her eyes lighting up as Coden set it down with a thud. All right, let's see if we can get this old girl singing. As Mav coaxed the antique back to life, the others watched, a mix of hope and desperation in their eyes. The hum of the machine was almost comforting, a reminder of a simpler time, albeit one with its own set of complications. Okay, Mav said, wiping a smudge of dust from her hands. We're live, or at least as live as we're gonna get. Time to hail Earth and hope they're not too busy with dinner to listen. The first crackles of static were promising, a sign that the ancient device wasn't entirely useless. Mav adjusted the dials, her focus absolute, and soon a voice came through, distorted but unmistakably human. This is Selene's cradle calling Earth. Do you read? Over. There was a pause, a long, tense moment where the universe seemed to hold its breath, and then a reply crackled through the air. This is Earth Control. We read you, Selene's cradle. What's your status? Over. Coden and Zilka exchanged a glance, relief flooding through them. At least someone was still listening. Mav leaned in, her voice steady. We've got a situation here. Our moon's gone rogue and it's playing with its orbit. We need support and fast. Over. Silence stretched out, the kind that comes before the storm, before Earth Control's voice returned, cautious. Say again, Selene's cradle, a rogue moon. Over. Zilka muttered under her breath. Great, they think we're pranking them. Mav didn't miss a beat. You heard right. The moon's being controlled by some kind of sentient force and it's messing with the orbit. We need to figure out how to shut it down. Over. Another pause followed by a more urgent tone. Understood, Selene's cradle. We'll prepare a response team. Stay in contact. Over and out. The line went dead, leaving the trio alone with the hum of the radio and the enormity of their task. They'd made contact, but whether it would be enough to avert disaster was another question entirely. Well, that went better than expected, Coden said, rubbing the back of his neck. Yes, but now we wait, Zilka replied. And hope they don't decide to write us off as lunatics. Mav switched off the radio, her expression thoughtful. Either way, we've bought ourselves a bit more time. Now we need to figure out how to stop this thing from turning our orbit into a game of cosmic pinball. The signal's tendrils were relentless, probing deeper into the systems, its intent clear even if its origins remained a mystery. As the trio regrouped, the weight of their mission settled over them like a second skin. If we can't stop it, can we at least slow it down? Coden asked, his gaze fixed on the screen. Possibly, Zilka said, her mind racing through the possibilities. If we can isolate parts of the system, create bottlenecks, we might be able to disrupt its control. And then what? Mav asked, arms crossed. Hope it gets bored and goes back to sleep. Pretty much, Zilka replied with a wry smile. Or at least buys us time until Earth gets here. The trio set about their task with renewed determination, each step a calculated risk. If the moon was learning, adapting, then they would have to be one step ahead, dancing on the edge of disaster with all the grace of a drunken acrobat. As they worked, the hum of the machinery filled the air, a constant reminder of the stakes. Each keystroke, each adjustment was a step closer to either salvation or oblivion. We've got to keep this up, Coden said, his voice a low rumble. Can't let it get the upper hand. Don't worry, Mav said, her fingers a blur over the console. I'm not about to let a rock get the better of me. Zilka nodded, her focus unyielding. We'll find a way, we have to. And so they fought, not just against the moon's sentience, but against the ticking clock, the relentless march of time that threatened to undo everything they'd worked for. In the face of overwhelming odds, they stood firm, a testament not just to human resilience but to sheer, stubborn grit. As they toiled away, the universe on the brink, they knew one thing for sure. They would fight until the stars themselves burned out, because giving up was simply not an option. Hey, once this is over, Coden said, breaking the silence, we should throw a party, celebrate not being moon dust. Yeah, Mav replied with a grin. Moon cheese for everyone. Zilka chuckled, nodding in agreement. But first, let's make sure there's still a moon to celebrate on. And with that, they dove back into the fray, 3 against the void, determined to defy the odds and carve a path through the darkness, one snarky remark at a time. Mav twiddled the radio dials like she was trying to tune in her favorite oldest station, but instead of Bohemian Rhapsody, all she got was static and the occasional mocking chirp from Earth Control. Coden leaned over her shoulder, eyes scanning the console with all the focus of a cat contemplating whether to knock a glass off a table. The signal's still clean, he asked, not because he doubted her but because he wanted to hear the universe confirm they're still screwed. Mav slapped the console out of habit, as though a good thump would fix the sentient moon more than her advanced degree in engineering ever could. Yeah, about as clean as my last relationship. Looks like our moon friend here is busy sending Earth a bedtime story about how nothing's wrong. False information, Zilka mused out loud, as if trying to decide whether the universe's sense of humor was dark enough to rival their own. Clever bastard, Coden snorted. It'd be impressive if it wasn't about to kill us all. Zilka, ever the optimist, added, hey, maybe the moon figures if it can convince Earth everything's peachy, it'll have us all to itself. Like some clingy ex who can't take a hint. The radio crackled with faux assurances from the moon, a soothing lullaby of lies. To Earth, Selene's cradle was just a shiny spot in the sky, dutifully reporting that all systems were operational and, oh, don't bother sending help. Nothing to see here. Move along. All right, Mav said, rolling up her sleeves like she was about to throw down with the universe itself. If our friendly neighborhood moon is going to play dirty, we're going to have to hit below the belt. Zilka squinted at the console, considering their options with the severity of a teacher eyeing a particularly dense student. We need to create something that disrupts its control. A device that says, hey, moon, stop being such a dick. Coden scratched his chin, pondering the moon's inexplicable sentience with the kind of skepticism usually reserved for conspiracy theories and late-night infomercials. So, like a jammer. Exactly, said Mav, her grin more feral than friendly. But with style. They got to work, the air in control room be thick with the smell of soldering, and a relentless tide of sarcasm. Coden and Mav rummaged through the equipment, piecing together a device with all the finesse of a kid building a model rocket from leftover fireworks. Maybe we should call it a moonbuster, Coden suggested, his voice laced with the kind of dry humor that only comes from impending doom. Mav smirked as she connected more wires than should probably ever meet. More like a Hail Mary. Do we even have a plan B? Zilka asked, watching them create like mad scientists on a caffeine binge. Coden shrugged. Plan B is the same as Plan A. Hope Plan A works. Reassuring, Zilka replied, dry as a desert in summer. The Moonbuster, or whatever they decided would be the least stupid name, was finally ready. It gleamed ominously under the flickering fluorescent light, a potential savior cobbled together with the desperation and manic energy of humans on the brink. All right, let's fire this baby up, Mav said, plugging the device into the console with the kind of enthusiasm that only comes from gambling the universe doesn't hate you that much. The console hummed, the device emitting a low-frequency buzz that resonated in their bones, like standing too close to a particularly vengeful bass speaker. There was a tense moment of nothing, followed by screens flickering wildly, the moon's signal twisting and sliding around their defenses. For a second, hope hung in the air, fragile and thin as paper. And then the universe, in its infinite wisdom, decided that hope was overrated. Instead of disrupting the moon's control, the device seemed to have the celestial equivalent of hitting the gas while the handbrake's still on. The numbers on the screen went from concerning to "Oh God, we're all going to die in the blink of an eye." Did we just make it worse? Zilka asked, staring at the data with the kind of disbelief usually reserved for unexpected bills. I think we supercharged it, Coden replied, his voice a mix of horror and grudging admiration. We've created a cosmic NOS button. Mav let out a groan that was 1 part frustration, 2 parts resignation. Of course. Leave it to us to accidentally step on the moon's accelerator. The moon's orbit, already wobbling like a drunk on a tightrope, lurched dangerously close to catastrophic. The device had managed to tickle whatever was controlling the moon in just the wrong way, like poking a sleeping bear with a branding iron. Okay, new plan, Coden said, his voice laced with a grim determination that suggested he was ready to arm wrestle the moon into submission if it came to it. Unplug and pray, Zilka suggested, only half joking. Mav was already tearing at the device's wires, ripping it free of the console as if the sheer force of will could reverse the cosmos' inclination to screw with them. It's a start. Then we figure out how to clean up this mess before Earth decides to nuke the problem from orbit. With the device dismantled, the screens settled back into their regular chaotic patterns, which was only marginally less terrifying than before. The moon's signal continued to worm its way through the systems, undeterred by their pathetic attempts at disruption. Looks like we've got front row seats to the apocalypse, Coden said, staring at the screens with a mix of trepidation and reluctant acceptance. And all we brought was popcorn, Mav added with a wry smile. Zilka glanced between them, the trio's shared grim humor the only thing keeping despair at bay. Well, at least we'll go out with a laugh. The room fell silent, punctuated only by the steady hum of the machinery, each of them lost in thought, strategizing their next move in a game they hadn't asked to play. Maybe we need to think smaller, Zilka mused after a moment, her gaze fixed on the screen's unyielding chaos. Instead of trying to punch it in the face, maybe we poke it in the eye. Coden raised an eyebrow. You're thinking sabotage, not straight-up combat. Exactly. We find its weak points, exploit them. Small, precise disruptions. Make it work for every inch. And here I thought you were the sensible one, Mav replied, her grin sharp and approving. Okay, let's see if we can turn our moon into a cosmic pincushion. They dove back into their work, this time with the precision and cunning of thieves planning a heist. The goal wasn't brute force but subtlety, hoping to chip away at the moon's control bit by bit. "Think of it like a game of chess," Zilka said, her fingers flying over the console. "Only we're playing against a grandmaster who's also a rock." "Ah, chess," Coden replied with a grin. "The sport of kings, and dumbasses who think they can win against an AI with delusions of grandeur." Mav snickered as she adjusted the settings on the console. "Nothing wrong with a little optimism. Worst case, we die in glory." "And best case?" Zilka asked, not looking up from her work. "Best case," Mav replied, her tone light but her intention deadly serious. "The moon learns that humans don't go down without a fight." With renewed purpose, they set to creating a series of small, targeted disruptions, each one a calculated risk designed to destabilize the moon's control. It was a long shot, but long shots were all they had left. "Think it'll work?" Coden asked, his voice low, filled with the kind of hope that knows it shouldn't be there. "Does it ever?" Mav replied, a dry laugh escaping her lips. "But hell, let's give it a try." As they implemented their plan, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if their efforts would amount to anything more than a brief flicker of resistance against the dark. The moon's signal wavered, its tendrils writhing in response to the duo's meticulous sabotage. For a moment, it seemed like they might have a chance, their actions causing ripples through the system, each one a tiny victory in a sea of potential annihilation. "Looks like we're making progress," Zilka said, her eyes glued to the screen as if willing the data to obey. "One small step for mankind," Coden muttered, "and one giant leap for space idiots." Mav grinned, ignoring the beads of sweat forming on her brow. "Well, let's keep the momentum going. Who knows, we might just pull this off." The three of them worked tirelessly, their energy buoyed by the flicker of hope they'd managed to kindle amidst the chaos. Each disruption was a testament to their ingenuity, a declaration that they wouldn't go quietly into the night. As the moon's control weakened, the room hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. The trio moved like a well-oiled machine, the sarcasm and dark humor flowing freely as they toiled against the odds. "Hey, if we survive this," Coden said, his voice filled with the kind of bravado that can only come from staring into the abyss, "we should pitch this as a movie. 3 idiots save the world." Mav snorted, elbowing him playfully. "Sure, as long as I get casting approval." "No one wants to play the chick who almost destroyed the Earth with a toaster." "And I want royalties," Zilka added, her fingers dancing over the console with relentless precision. "Preferably not in moon rocks." Their banter was interrupted by a sudden spike on the screen, the signal flaring as if in protest of their continued defiance. The moon's sentience was reacting, pushing back with the ferocity of a cornered animal. "It's fighting back," Zilka warned, her voice laced with urgency. "Then let's give it hell," Mav replied, the fire in her eyes a stark contrast to the cold void outside. As they continued their assault, the room seemed to vibrate with the energy of their efforts, each small victory a reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. The universe may have thrown them into the deep end, but they'd be damned if they didn't swim. The moon's control wavered, its tendrils fraying at the edges as their sabotage took hold. It wasn't a decisive victory, but it was enough to give them room to breathe. "Think we might actually pull this off?" Coden asked, his voice a mix of hope and disbelief. "Who knows?" Mav replied, her tone confident but cautious. "But at least we're not going down without a fight." The trio pressed on, each disruption a small triumph in the face of overwhelming odds. They didn't know whether they'd succeed, but they were determined to make the moon earn every inch it tried to take. As they worked, the universe seemed to pause, waiting to see if their efforts would be enough to tip the scales in their favor, or if their defiance would be for nothing. "Whatever happens," Zilka said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them, "at least we tried." "Yeah," Coden replied, his gaze fixed on the screen. "And maybe, just maybe, it'll be enough." They continued their assault, each tiny victory buoying their spirits as they fought against the creeping despair. They didn't know what the future held, but as long as they had breath in their bodies, they'd fight to see it. In the end, their success or failure didn't matter. What mattered was that they stood together, fighting against the odds with every ounce of strength they had left. And in that moment, they were invincible. The air in Control Room B was as stale as the collective mood. Koden, Zilka, and Mav sat hunched over the console, their faces painted with a grim determination that could have been mistaken for constipation at a glance. The only sounds were the hum of machinery and the occasional creak from Mav's suspiciously old chair. Koden always suspected it would give way at the worst possible moment, like everything else in this god-forsaken place. Earth's already got their finger hovering over the panic button, Koden said, staring at the screen with all the enthusiasm of a man reading his own obituary. If we don't fix this soon, they're gonna nuke the moon and call it a day. Yeah, because nothing solves problems like dropping a few thousand megatons on him, Mav replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. That'll definitely calm things down. Zilka rubbed at her eyes, her optimism fraying at the edges like a cheap rug. We need to find a way to stop this moon from messing with our heads and our hardware. Maybe. Maybe there's a connection between the black holes and this sentient force. Great, Koden snorted. Because messing with miniature black holes has no consequences written all over it. Mav leaned forward, rubbing her temples as if she could massage the chaos into clarity. If our power source is more than just a fancy battery, then we've got a real problem. Or another problem on the pile. One problem at a time, Zilka said, her voice a fragile thread holding them together. Let's focus on what we can control. We're not out of tricks yet, right? Koden sighed, glancing at the console with the kind of love-hate relationship usually reserved for an ex. If there's one thing humans are good at, it's making a mess of things. And then living in that mess. But seriously, Mav cut in, if there's a link between the black holes and the signal, it's risky, sure, but maybe we can exploit it. Exploit it how? Koden asked, skepticism as thick as the tension in the room. We gonna ask it nicely to stop screwing with our orbit, Zilka shrugged, a hint of a plan forming behind her eyes. We could try to disrupt the link. If the power source is feeding it, maybe we can cut it off. Or blow us all up in the process, Koden muttered. Hey, at least it'd be quick, Mav added with a grin that was all sharp edges. And think of the press, we'd be legends, tragic, idiotic legends. The gallows humor was the only thing keeping them from spiraling into full-blown despair. Each joked quip was a lifeline pulling them back from the precipice of hopelessness. All right, let's say we go with this plan, Koden said, his tone shifting from cynical to cautiously intrigued. What's the first step? First, we need to confirm if there's even a link, Zilka replied, fingers flying over the console. Then we figure out how to mess with it. Great, Mav nodded. A shot in the dark. Just how I like my chances. With renewed, albeit slightly manic, energy, the trio set to work. Mav, ever the pragmatist, started dissecting the data with the care of a surgeon who occasionally liked to play with chainsaws. Zilka focused on mapping out the potential connections between the black holes and the moon's mischievous sentience. Koden, for his part, kept an eye on the screen, ready to snark at the first sign of disaster. As they dug deeper into the data, the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as if the universe itself wanted to get in on the cosmic joke. They were 3 humans against a sentient moon, and the odds were about as comforting as a bear hug from a grizzly. So we're basically trying to blind a moon with a flashlight, Koden said, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the console. Pretty much, Zilka replied, not missing a beat, but it's a really high-tech flashlight. With the power of 100 mini-suns, Mav added, her voice laced with a morbid cheerfulness. What could possibly go wrong? The console beeped ominously, the data shifting like a live thing under their scrutiny. It was a testament to their combined efforts, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, that they hadn't given up yet. They were neck-deep in chaos and dragging themselves further in with every keystroke. Look at this, Zilka said, pointing to a cluster of numbers that seemed to dance across the screen, taunting them with their complexity. "I think this is it." The link. Coden squinted at the screen as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something more comforting, like a recipe for cookies. "Looks like gibberish to me." "That's because it is," Mav said. "But it's our gibberish." The discovery was a small victory, a glimmer of hope in a sea of near catastrophe. It was also their best chance at pulling the rug out from under the moon's sentience, assuming the rug wasn't booby-trapped. "So what's the play?" Coden asked, crossing his arms and trying not to think about how easy it would be for everything to go spectacularly wrong. "We disrupt the connection," Zilka said, her voice firm. "Cut off its power source, weaken it enough that it can't keep twisting our systems around." "Simple then," Mav chuckled. "Just a casual act of cosmic sabotage. Still beats sitting around waiting for Earth to nuke us," Coden replied. "So, how do we pull this off without turning ourselves into space debris?" Zilka hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. It was a reminder that no matter how united they were still stumbling blind through the dark. "We take it slow," she finally said. "We've got to be smart about this. One wrong move and we could end up making things worse." "Right," Mav agreed. "So, no pressure." The sarcasm flowed freely, a balm against the stark reality of their situation. They were a trio of underdogs, but they had one thing going for them: they were too stubborn to quit. "You think anyone back on Earth has a clue what's going on?" Coden asked, more out of morbid curiosity than any real hope of an answer. "Probably not," Mav replied. "They're likely just watching and waiting for us to either fix it or die trying." "Good to know we're the entertainment," Coden said with a wry smile. "Guess we better give them a show." The room fell into a focused silence, the kind that comes before an orchestra's final crescendo. Each of them was locked in a dance of numbers and signals, a desperate waltz on the edge of oblivion. As they worked, time blurred, lost to the rhythm of keystrokes and the constant hum of the machines. Minutes or hours could have passed for all they knew. They were lost in the task, the enormity of their undertaking both a burden and a drive. Mav was the first to break the silence, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I think I've got it. We can reroute some of the power, create a feedback loop. It'll give the moon one hell of a headache." "Sounds good," Coden said, his grin inching towards genuine. "Let's give it a migraine." Zilka nodded, her fingers a blur as she typed in the final commands. "Ready when you are." "All right then," Mav said, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "Let's poke this thing in the eye and see what happens." With a few final keystrokes, their plan was set into motion, the data shifting and reshaping under their influence. It was a gamble, a leap into the unknown with no safety net. But it was also their best chance at survival. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant, as if the universe was holding its breath. Then everything happened at once. The room shook, the screens flickering with a mad dance of data as the moon's signal fought back, desperate to maintain control. "Looks like we got its attention," Coden said, holding onto the console as the ground seemed to sway beneath him. "Good," Mav replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Let's see how it likes us now." The feedback loop took hold, the power surging back through the system with a force that was almost tangible. The moon's signal wavered, its grip loosening as the trio's sabotage began to unravel its hold. They were winning, if only by inches, but it was enough to spark a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Each second that passed was a victory, a testament to their resilience and determination. "Keep it up," Zilka urged, her eyes glued to the screen. "We're almost there." The room buzzed with energy, a cacophony of sound and fury that filled the space with a frenetic urgency. They were dancing on the edge of disaster, but they were doing it together, united in their defiance. As the moon's control continued to falter, the room seemed to exhale, the pressure easing as their efforts began to bear fruit. It wasn't a sure thing, not by a long shot, but it was enough to give them hope. "Looks like we might just pull this off," Coden said, his voice filled with a cautious optimism. Don't jinx it, Mav warned, though her grin was as infectious as ever. And as they worked, the universe seemed to pause, waiting to see if their efforts would be enough to tip the scales, or if they'd be swallowed by the void. For now, they were still standing, and that was enough. The moon had picked up speed, like a lazy teenager suddenly realizing they were late for school. Every second grazing closer, it loomed larger, like a massive celestial hangover threatening to explode all over the planet's carpet. Zilka's fingers danced across the console, the only rhythm keeping her grounded. Coden watched with a grim sort of fascination. Well, at least if it crashes into us, we won't have to worry about paying the rent anymore. Mav snorted, twisting dials on the radio like an old-timey DJ. Yeah, because we'll be cosmic dust. That's one way to get out of student loans. Zilka bit her lip, half a smile cracking her focused facade. Focus, children. We've got a sentient moon to piss off. Coden rolled his eyes. Doesn't take much nowadays. It's like our moon hit puberty and now thinks it rules the universe. Their current plan involved a dangerous game of cosmic roulette, synchronizing the miniature black holes to neutralize the sentient force. If it worked, they'd be geniuses. If it didn't, well, they wouldn't be around for the postmortem. Okay, here's the deal, Zilka said, pulling up a bright map of the moon's tangled energy web. If we can get these black holes to align just right, we might disrupt the sentient force's control. And if we can't, Mav asked, eyebrow raised in a challenge. Then we get to find out if the afterlife has better coffee, Zilka replied dryly. Coden shook his head, his skepticism practically a living thing in the stale air. Great. So, we're playing chess against a moon with an IQ that makes us look like gnats. What's next? A thumb war with a supernova? Think of it as a friendly game of cosmic chicken, Mav suggested, her grin sharp enough to cut glass. Except the loser gets vaporized. Just then the console emitted a sharp beep, a sound as pleasant as nails on a chalkboard. Zilka's face fell into a frown as she scanned the data. What? Coden demanded, leaning over her shoulder. Someone's messing with the system, Zilka answered, her voice tightening into a low growl. Internal sabotage. Guess not everyone's a fan of our plan. Mav groaned, rubbing her temples like she could massage the headache away. Oh, good. Because we really needed another problem, right? Right up there with needing a root canal during a power outage, Coden muttered. Zilka's fingers flew across the console, locking out intrusions with the determination of a bouncer at an exclusive club. I'll handle this. You two keep an eye on the moon. Mav nodded, turning her attention back to the radio. I'll see if we can get any signal past the static. Maybe Earth's got a plan that doesn't involve nuking us to Kingdom Come. Coden didn't answer, already lost in thought. He stared at the screen, the moon's descent mirrored in the spiraling data patterns. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, and they were tied to the tracks. Any chance we can speed this up? Mav asked, not looking up from the radio. The moon's getting really friendly, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of commitment. Working on it, Zilka replied, typing furiously. Just need to get these black holes to play nice. Coden shot her a glance, deadpan. You realize we're basically asking a couple of miniature black holes to behave like well-trained puppies, right? Hey, at this point, I'd settle for them acting like slightly confused cats. Zilka shot back, not missing a beat. The machinery hummed ominously, the air thick with the potential for either salvation or destruction. Coden watched as Zilka finally stepped back from the console, wiping her brow. All right, I've locked out the saboteur. They'll have to try harder if they want to stop us. Good, Mav said, fiddling with the last adjustments on the radio. I've managed to get a signal through. It's weak, but Earth might hear us over the static. Coden nodded, tension coiling tight in his shoulders. Perfect. Let them know we're still alive and we'd like to keep it that way. Thank you very much. Mav gave a thumbs up, a smirk playing on her lips. Message sent. Now we just wait for them to panic. Let's just hope they don't decide to solve their problems with nukes, Zilka added, crossing her arms. We've got enough issues without adding radioactive fallout to the mix. Silence fell, the kind that's more uneasy truce than peaceful calm. They were balancing on a knife's edge, each of them acutely aware of how close they were to losing everything. The console beeped again, a different, more urgent tone this time. Zilka's eyes widened as she checked the readout. The black holes are aligning. It's working. Coden let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. About time something went right. Don't get too excited, Mav cautioned, though she couldn't hide the gleam of hope in her eyes. We're not out of the woods yet, not even close, Zilka agreed. But it's a start. The moon's descent slowed, the energy fields around it flickering like a bad hologram. For the first time it seemed hesitant, unsure of itself. Victory by an inch, but in their line of work that was as good as a mile. Looks like we've got the upper hand, Coden said, though he didn't quite believe it himself. For now. Zilka nodded, fingers poised over the console, ready for whatever came next. Keep your guard up. It's not over till we're back home with a cold beer in hand, preferably before the moon decides to play bumper cars with the planet, Mav added, her laughter a brittle, hopeful thing. Agreed, Coden said, his own smile a shadow of its usual sardonic self. Now let's finish this and go home. It was a promise whispered into the void, a vow they'd fight tooth and nail to keep. As the minutes ticked by, the room was a hive of activity, each of them playing their part in the desperate dance for survival. They were comrades in arms, clinging to the hope that their ingenuity and sheer stubbornness would see them through. Status update, Coden demanded, eyes never leaving the screen. The alignment's holding, Zilka said, her fingers skimming the console like a virtuoso. We're keeping the moon in check for now, and Earth, Mav asked, leaning back in her seat. They're still on standby, Zilka replied. No nukes yet, so I'd call that a win. Coden chuckled, the sound more relieved than amused. A win indeed. Let's keep it that way. The minutes stretched into hours, the moon hovering like an indecisive shopper, unsure whether to commit to its purchase, or in this case, planetary destruction. Feels like we've been at this forever, Mav said, breaking the silence. Anyone else feel like they could use a nap that lasts a decade, only if it comes with breakfast in bed? Coden replied, not missing a beat. Zilka smirked, eyes still glued to the console. I'll take a stiff drink and a week of sleep, thanks. I'll take whatever has the highest alcohol content, Mav quipped. After all, we've earned it. The tension in the room was palpable, a living entity that ebbed and flowed with each new revelation on the console. But even as the moon's influence waned, they knew the battle was far from over. The console beeped once more, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. Zilka's eyes widened at the data scrolling across the screen. We've done it. The moon's releasing control, really? Coden asked, disbelief coloring his voice. Really, Zilka confirmed, her grin bright and genuine. We did it, Mav whooped, the sound joyous and unrestrained. Hell yeah. Take that, sentient moon, Coden chuckled, the sound low and victorious. Looks like we're still in business. The moon, that massive celestial toddler throwing a tantrum, seemed to retreat, its grip loosening as the trio's plan came to fruition. It wasn't gone, but for the first time it wasn't actively trying to kill them. We've stabilized the orbit, Zilka said, her voice calm and collected. Now we just need to hold it. Piece of cake, Mav said, though her eyes were wary. As long as no one else tries to sabotage us, Coden nodded, his gaze steady. Agreed. Let's keep our eyes open. They worked in silence, the room a cocoon of concentration and effort. Each of them knew the stakes, understood the price of failure. As the moon settled into its new, non-lethal trajectory, the trio allowed themselves a brief moment of quiet triumph. They had faced impossibility and come out the other side, scarred but unbroken. We did it, Zilka repeated, her voice soft, almost disbelieving. Of course we did, Coden said, his voice warm. We're stubborn as hell, Mav laughed, the sound bright and unrestrained. Damn right. Never doubted us for a second. The console beeped again, the sound now a comfort rather than a threat. They had bought themselves time, a precious commodity in a universe that cared little for human lives. Now what? Mav asked, her eyes bright with the thrill of victory. Now we wait, Coden replied. See if Earth gets the memo and backs off the nuke button. Sounds like a plan, Zilka said, her smile genuine and wide. I could use a break. They settled back in their chairs, the tension finally easing from their muscles. It was a fragile peace, but it was theirs, hard-won and fiercely defended. The machinery hummed softly, the room filled with the quiet sounds of their breathing, the weight of survival heavy yet welcome. Think they'll throw us a parade? Mav asked, her voice light with amusement. Doubt it, Coden replied, his smile a crooked thing. But they might name a crater after us. Better than nothing, Zilka said, her laughter a soothing balm. They sat in companionable silence, the enormity of their achievement slowly sinking in. They had faced the odds and come out the other side, battered but unbowed. As the first rays of dawn broke over the distant horizon, the trio shared a look, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their courage and ingenuity lighting the way. And though the battle was far from over, they knew they'd face whatever came next together. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but they had each other, and that was enough. For now. Coden leaned back in his chair, eyes glued to the screen as the moon's energy readings danced like a drunk at a wedding. You know, this has been the longest not-quite disaster I've ever been a part of. I feel like we're in some cosmic sitcom that's been canceled, but no one told us. Zilka shot him a sidelong glance, fingers still flying over the console. Maybe we're just the backup cast in someone else's story. Stuck here like rats on a slowly sinking ship. Speak for yourself, Mav chimed in, her fingers deftly adjusting the radio dials. I'm the star of my own show. And I've got the ratings to prove it. Your mom doesn't count as reliable viewership, Mav, Coden said deadpan. Mav grinned. Her and 100 billion other people back on Earth just waiting for us to save their skins. Unfortunately, they don't know we're the ones saving the day, Zilka muttered, her eyebrows furrowing as she scanned the latest data. The moon's still trying to play God with its signals. Let's hope Earth doesn't decide we're expendable, Coden said, fingers drumming a thoughtful rhythm on the armrest. I'm not a fan of glowing in the dark. The console beeped, a rapid, insistent noise that sounded far too optimistic for the situation. Zilka's face lit up with the kind of cautious optimism usually reserved for lottery winners and people who find $20 in an old coat pocket. The black holes are aligning, she reported, a hint of triumph in her voice. We're about to pull the rug right out from under that moon's rocky feet. About time, Mav said, her words a mixture of relief and disbelief. I was starting to think we'd be stuck here forever, playing chicken with a giant rock. The machinery in control room hummed with an undercurrent of tension, like it could feel the anticipation in the air, or maybe it was just protesting the abuse. Coden watched the readings, each line on the screen a tiny, electronic cheerleader for their impending victory. Let's see if we can't teach this moon a lesson about human ingenuity, he said, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. And maybe send a memo to Earth that we're not dead yet. Zilka's fingers danced over the console once more, pulling up the intricate dance of code and physics that would deliver their coup de grace. If we can destabilize the sentient force, we should be able to regain control over the systems, like hacking into your own diary to stop it from tattling, Mav commented with a smirk. I love it. Let's just hope the moon's not got a backup plan, Coden replied. I don't fancy another round of celestial charades. The black holes began to sink, their gravity wells merging into a single force of nature that could turn the tides, or, hopefully, teach a sentient moon how to play nice. As the energy surged, the console spat out lines of data like a breathless news anchor, updating the team on every astronomical twitch and turn. Here we go, Zilka muttered, her eyes sharp and focused. Come on, you stupid rock. Give up. The moon's energy fields flickered, a cosmic strobe light falling out of rhythm. It was a beautiful mess, the kind of chaos that made mathematicians and artists alike weep tears of joy. Coden couldn't help but lean in, as if being closer to the screen would change anything but his eyesight. "It's working," Zilka said, her voice just above a whisper. "It's actually working." "Would you look at that," Mav said, her tone a mix of awe and smug satisfaction. "Who knew a couple of miniature black holes could solve all our problems? I'll be sure to write that on my autobiography," Coden quipped. Chapter 10. Black Holes and Other Problem Solvers. The moon's resistance dwindled, its system slowly bowing to the human effort like a begrudging opponent finally acknowledging defeat. It was a beautiful sight, even if the beauty was more in the "our asses are saved" kind of way. Zilka's fingers went still, and she let out a long, shaky breath. "We've regained control. The moon's systems are back online." Coden couldn't help but grin, a real, genuine smile that felt foreign on his face after so much stress. "Looks like we just pulled off the impossible." Mav leaned back in her chair, exhaling loudly. "I always knew we had it in us." Well, maybe not always, but at least for the past 10 minutes. The console beeped with a new urgency, but this time it was a good kind, the "you've got mail that isn't a bill" kind. Zilka scanned the incoming data, her eyes widening. "Earth's picking up our signal," she announced, her voice filled with relief. "We're back in communication." Coden let out a whoop, the sound echoing in the small room. "Someone get the champagne. We're not dead, and we've got a line to HQ. Better yet, let's tell them about our little adventure," Mav suggested, her hands already moving to the radio controls. "They're gonna love hearing how a sentient moon almost made them all glow in the dark." With a few deft adjustments, Mav had the radio broadcasting clear across the void. "Earth, this is Control Room B. We've regained control over the moon's systems. Repeat, the threat has been neutralized. You can call off the nukes." There was a pause, the kind that stretched longer than a politician's promise, then a voice crackled through the static. "Control Room B, this is Earth Command. Can you confirm the situation?" "Confirmed," Coden replied, leaning into the mic with a grin. "We've neutralized the threat using synchronized black holes. You might want to send us a thank you card." There was a pause, as if the operators were processing the sheer audacity of their solution. "Understood, Control Room B. Stand by for further instructions." Zilka chuckled, the sound a release of tension that had been building for far too long. "I think we'll be standing by for a long time yet. At least we're standing," Coden pointed out. "Could be worse." "Yeah," Mav said, stretching her arms over her head. "Could be dead." The room settled into an uneasy calm, the victory still fresh and a little unreal. It was hard to believe that their backs from the brink solution had actually worked, and yet here they were, alive and in control. "Think they'll promote us for this?" Zilka asked, tapping her fingers against the console in a rhythm only she knew. "They might demote us just for the cheek of it," Coden replied, a laugh escaping his lips. "I mean, who else would use black holes as a fix-it-all?" Mav snorted. "Only the desperate and the bonkers. Good thing we're both," Zilka added, a smirk on her face. Control Room B was theirs again, a place of triumph carved out of chaos and desperation. They were battered, exhausted, but still standing. "So what's the plan now?" Mav asked, leaning back with a sigh as if she hadn't just helped avert a planetary disaster. "Do we wait for the parade or start writing our memoirs?" "Well, I'm open for suggestions," Coden said, shrugging. "Personally, I vote for finding whoever's been sending those rogue signals and making them regret their life choices." Zilka nodded, a steely determination in her eyes. "We've got a chance now to clean up whatever mess has been left behind." "I'd rather not have to do this again." "Agreed," Mav said. "Once was enough. Let's make sure this moon knows who's boss." With renewed focus, the trio got back to work, digging through the data for any traces of their saboteur. It was a job for someone with more patience and less caffeine in their system, but they weren't about to trust anyone else with it. "Looks like someone tried to cover their tracks," Zilka noted, her fingers flying over the console once more. "But not well enough." Coden leaned over her shoulder, eyes narrowing as he scanned the readout. "Any idea who it is?" "Not yet," she replied, "but I'm betting they left a digital fingerprint somewhere." "We'll find it," Mav said, her voice filled with a quiet confidence that was backed by sheer bloody-mindedness. "And when we do, we're gonna make them wish they'd picked a different target than a sentient rock," Coden chuckled. "In the meantime, let's keep this moon from throwing any more tantrums." The hours ticked by, filled with the quiet symphony of beeps and clicks as they worked to stabilize the moon systems. It was a mundane task in the wake of their earlier heroics, but it was necessary. "We're getting there," Zilka murmured, eyes still glued to the screen. "It's slow, but at least we're on the right track. Guess we'll have to settle for being heroes another day," Mav said, her tone dripping with faux disappointment. Coden snorted. "I'm okay with a little boredom, to be honest. Gives me time to catch up on my reading." "You read?" Mav asked, raising an eyebrow. And here I thought you just stared at the words until they rearranged themselves into a movie. "Hey, some of us enjoy the finer things in life," Coden replied with a grin. Like books and not dying. They continued their work, the hours slipping by in a blur of data and determination. The moon was theirs once more, and for the first time it felt like they were truly in control. As they worked, the distant glow of dawn crept through the small window in the control room, painting the walls in shades of pink and gold. It was a reminder that even in the depths of space, there was beauty to be found. "Looks like we're gonna live to see another day," Coden said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "And maybe even get a decent night's sleep," Zilka added, though the hope in her voice was tinged with exhaustion. Mav chuckled, her eyes bright with triumph. "Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. We've still got a moon to babysit." With a shared nod, they continued their work, determination etched into their features. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. They were a small team in a vast universe, but they'd proven their mettle beyond a shadow of a doubt. And as the first rays of dawn kissed the horizon, they knew they'd face whatever came next together, stubborn and unstoppable in the face of cosmic apathy. In the end, they were human, and that was more than enough. The hum in Control Room B was different now, a contented purr rather than the anxious growl it had been. Coden, Zilka, and Mav lounged in their chairs, looking like a trio of survivors after a particularly nasty bar brawl. They'd faced down a sentient moon with nothing more than a few black holes and a lot of caffeine. Yet here they were, victorious and very much alive, a miracle in itself. "Didn't think I'd see the day where I'd thank a black hole for saving my skin," Coden said, running a hand over his stubbly chin. "Next thing you know, we'll be asking supernovas for relationship advice." Zilka snorted, not looking up from her console where she was double-checking the systems. "I'd trust a supernova before I'd trust your taste in partners." "Hey, I'll have you know I'm extremely discerning," Coden shot back. "Only the finest and most emotionally unavailable for me." Mav rolled her eyes, fiddling with the radio dials again as if she couldn't resist. "You two gonna bicker all day, or are we actually gonna celebrate the fact that we didn't get turned into cosmic dust?" "Celebrating sounds good," Coden grinned, tossing a crumpled snack wrapper at Zilka. "We've earned it after all." Zilka caught the wrapper and lobbed it back, her eyes soft with something that looked suspiciously like affection. "All right, but don't start writing your memoirs just yet. We might still have some cleaning up to do." Always with the optimism, Mav chuckled, leaning back in her chair. "But hey, at least Earth's finally got its head out of its collective backside." "About time," Coden agreed, cracking his knuckles. "We've been doing all the heavy lifting down here. Up there, they're probably still trying to figure out which end is up." Earth Command had finally realized the full scope of the moon's mischief, mostly thanks to their desperate missives. The powers that be were now scrambling to reassess their lunar operations. Meanwhile, the trio in Control Room B basked in the irony of saving their overlords from an interstellar tantrum. "They'll want to debrief us sooner or later," Zilka said, her voice taking on a bureaucratic drawl. "Probably send us a nice, long form to fill out with 'How did you prevent the apocalypse?' as question 1. Coden groaned. "Ugh, admin work. I'd almost prefer another showdown with the moon," Mav snickered. You're not the one who'll have to explain how we rigged black holes to fix our interstellar plumbing issue. Coden spread his hands. Minor technical details. We got the job done, didn't we? Zilka nodded, her fingers dancing across the console, smoothing over the moon systems like a mechanic with a beloved, albeit temperamental, car. Yeah, and it'll take a while before everything's back to perfect working order. But we're stable for now, stable. Mav echoed, raising an eyebrow. I'll take it. So what's our next move? Coden asked, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Besides waiting for Earth to shower us with inadequate praise and even more inadequate hazard pay, Zilka shrugged. Keep an eye on the systems, I guess. Make sure our rock doesn't decide to throw another fit. Maybe we should have a chat with the tech team, Mav suggested, her eyes narrowing. Make sure they're not screwing things up on their end. Coden nodded. Good idea. Last thing we need is someone poking around where they shouldn't and setting off another moon-sized headache. The room fell into a comfortable silence, the trio finding a surprising sense of peace in the aftermath of chaos. It was rare, these moments of calm, and they savored it like a fine wine, knowing full well that it wouldn't last. Think they'll throw us a parade? Mav asked, her tone teasing. Zilka laughed. Sure, and they'll name this moon after us too. Selene's cradle does have a nice ring to it, Coden mused. But I'd settle for a hot shower and a meal that doesn't come in a vacuum-sealed bag. Oh, dream big, why don't you? Mav replied, sarcasm dripping from her words. Hey, I'm a simple man with simple pleasures, Coden grinned, stretching his legs out. And right now I'm just happy we're not dead. Gotta admit, it's a nice change of pace, Zilka said, her fingers finally stilling on the console. The team sat in silence for a moment, basking in their victory. The moon had been quiet since they'd wrested control, its systems running smoothly under their watchful gaze. It was almost easy to forget that just hours ago, it had been attempting to send the planet into a frenzy. Wonder what Earth'll do with all this, Coden said, breaking the peace. You think they'll start treating the moon like it's alive? Probably start a committee to study it, Zilka replied dryly. By the time they wrap their heads around it, we'll be long dead and buried. Well, as long as they don't start asking for the moon's opinion on things, Mav added. Last thing we need is a celestial politician. Can you imagine? Coden chuckled, the image of a moon campaigning for office making him snort. Vote Selene, because the moon knows best, Zilka laughed. With slogans like that, it'd probably win. The trio continued to chat, their banter a balm for the adrenaline that still coursed through their veins. They'd faced down a sentient force and come out on top, against all odds. It was a heady sort of triumph, one that made them feel invincible despite the reality of their situation. But even as they celebrated, there was an underlying wariness. They knew that this was just one battle in a much larger war, a war against the unknown, the unpredictable, and the unfathomable. Think we'll ever have a quiet day? Mav asked, her voice wistful. Coden shrugged. Doubt it. But where's the fun in quiet? True, Zilka agreed, her eyes gleaming. We've got a knack for chaos, after all. And chaos seems to have a knack for us, Mav added with a wry grin. Their laughter echoed in the control room, a sound of defiance against the odds they'd overcome. They were a small team in a vast universe, but they'd proven that even in the face of cosmic apathy, humans had a way of making themselves heard. With the moon finally behaving itself and Earth's communication restored, the team settled into a sense of normalcy, or whatever passed for it in their line of work. Reports were filed, systems were checked, and the endless routine of maintenance continued. What's next? Coden asked as they wrapped up their tasks for the day. Sleep, Zilka replied immediately, stifling a yawn. Maybe a dreamless one for a change, Mav nodded, rising from her chair and stretching. And coffee. Lots and lots of coffee. Coden stood too, glancing at his teammates with a fondness that he'd never admit aloud. Sounds like a plan. Let's get out of here before the moon decides it misses us. They left Control Room B in a mess of snack wrappers and empty coffee mugs, but they also left it as heroes. albeit reluctant, sarcastic, and slightly cynical ones. As they made their way down the corridor, Coden couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They'd faced down the impossible and lived to tell the tale. The universe was vast and unpredictable, but they'd carved out a small victory amidst the chaos. "Think we'll ever get used to this?" Coden asked as they reached their quarters. Zilka shook her head. "I hope not. Wouldn't be half as fun if we did." Mav flashed him a grin. "Speak for yourself." "I'm ready for a quiet day or two." They shared a laugh, their camaraderie a testament to the trials they'd faced together. They were a team, forged in the fires of chaos and tempered by the humor that kept them sane. And as they turned in for the night, they knew that whatever came next, they'd face it head-on, with a grin, a joke, and a stubborn refusal to back down. In the grand scheme of things, they were just a blip in the universe. But they were human, and that was more than enough.